Welcome. Welcome to a place of progress that may not be perfect, but is determined to move forward. We are Relentless Church.
All right, so for the next couple of weeks, I want to touch on this new series. I've been thinking about, the last series we were in was called Ghost Stories, and we talked about the Holy Spirit. We talked about kind of what that looks like. And lately I feel like, I don't know, one of the things, I guess the way I would preface is saying, one of the things that when we started this church, what we really wanted to lean into, or rather not shy away from, were the difficult or challenging things that Scripture presents us, or that the Christian life presents us. And of course, I feel like everybody says that, but very early on, one of the phrases we used as Relentless Church people is we want to be boat jumpers. We use that phrase a lot around here, where it means we want to be, of the 12 disciples that were in the boat when Jesus was walking on water, only one of them ever got out of the boat and walked on water. The other 11 sat in the boat and watched it happen. And while they're still counted among the disciples, they're still holy, they still went on to do a lot with the church, there's an experience they missed out on because they refused to just go, to do it. And Peter it wasn't like he was more saintly than the other ones. He just was a little bit maybe more reckless, a little bit more thoughtless. I don't know. He just didn't hesitate, right? He said, if that's you, Lord, then call to me and I'll come out to you. And Jesus is like, come on then. And he's like, just jumps out, right? And the other 11 are like, let's let Peter be the guinea pig here, right? We've always wanted to create a church that said, we'll go. Let's go. Isaiah 6:8. Isaiah's having this vision, and he hears the voice of the Lord say, who will go? Who will tell my people? And his response is one of our life verses. It's Isaiah 6:8. Here I am, Lord, send me. And we want that mentality to be pervasive in the culture of Relentless Church, that who will step up, who will go tell that person, who will love that person, who will care about that person, who will go speak on behalf of the Lord into their life. Here I am, send me, without hesitation. It doesn't mean that we have it all together. It does not mean that we're going to do it perfectly every time, but it just means we're going to go. I'm going to jump out of the boat. I'm going to get 3 steps in and probably fall like Peter did, but Jesus is right there to catch me. And the experience still happens, right? The story still survives. It's not a story of how Peter moved in God's presence and was successful and sprinted across the water, right? It's a story of how he took 3 steps and fell. But I'd rather take those 3 steps and fall and let him catch me and live in infamy for the kingdom than stay in the boat and never have the experience. Does that make sense? So that's kind of one of the guiding principles that we adhere to, I think, here. And because of that, it means we're going to challenge ourselves. We're going to push ourselves further and harder and deeper into what God is saying and doing. And that is not always easy. I feel like, especially in Christianity, especially when you first get saved or you first come to know Christ, you're like, I'm going to do this, and you're really excited, and you're like, I'm going to change the world. And then, you have trouble, just reading your Bible and praying regularly. And it's like we expect to do these maybe massive moves of God sometimes, or allow the presence of the Lord to do miracles through us, but we can't hardly go 2 days without just losing our minds, right? And so there's this disconnect sometimes between what we say and what we live. And what I will aim to do every time that I am in this place speaking, every time that I'm communicating or speaking with you personally, is how do we close that gap between what we say we want to do in Christ and how we live in Christ? Does that make sense? So recently I've been reading through the Sermon on the Mount again. It's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's Jesus' first full recorded sermon in Scripture. And there's a particular part that kept standing out to me. And, it's part of it I've heard 1,000 times. But for whatever reason, it was just hitting again. And I thought, I think this needs to be our challenge going into the Christmas season. Because it's very easy through the Christmas season to focus on, whether it's the busy schedules or the holiday parties or, all the stuff that happens in Christmas. And sometimes we kind of autopilot the rest of the year. You know what I mean? Like we go, okay, I've got all this kind of stuff to do. We're just going to coast through the end of 2022 and then start over. Whether that's maybe you had New Year's resolutions or plans or whatever that you started in 2022 that have already taken a nosedive, and you're like, all right, I'm just going to get out of this year. Can I just make it through this year, and then we'll reset? But I felt like God kept saying, no, we need to focus on this moving into the Christmas season. And it's not very Christmassy, except that it is. And I want to paint that picture to you. So we're in Matthew chapter 5. And we're going to pick it up in verse 43. You're probably familiar with this section of Scripture, but I'm going to read it anyway. First in the NLT, and then I want to read it to you in the Message because it's a little bit more challenging. Verse 43, it says, you have heard, this is Jesus teaching, you have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In that way you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and on the unjust alike. If you only love those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how different are you from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. I'm going to read it again, but I want to read it in the Message translation because I feel like sometimes the Message translation puts a little attitude on, a little stank on it. Like it gives Jesus a little bit of sarcasm, which I understand. Like it's a paraphrase. Don't take it literally. Don't build your theology on it. But sometimes for those of us especially that have been in church for a good long while and we start to hear a verse that's familiar, we kind of tune it out. Not on purpose, not intentionally, not even negatively, but I mean, let's be honest. If you grew up or you've been around church culture, we have this ability to just kind of tune out the topics that we feel like we know. And that's usually the area that you probably most need to listen. I'm guilty of that too. How many times have I sat in a service and the pastor's been like, okay, today we're going to talk about love. And I'm like, I got it. Okay, I know this service. I know this message. Love everybody. 1 Corinthians 13. Like I know where we're going. And it's usually that season of my life that I most need to hear it. So I'm going to read it again in a different translation in the Message, and it's on the screen if you don't have that in front of you. It says, you're familiar with the old written law, love your friend, and its unwritten companion, hate your enemy. I'm challenging that. I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. Oof, okay. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the supple moves of prayer. I'm going to use the word supple a lot. Supple moves of prayer. For then you are working out your true selves, your God-created selves. This is what God does. He gives his best, the sun to warm and the rain to nourish, to everyone, regardless, the good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anyone can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, what I'm saying is, grow up. I love that. I don't know if Jesus actually said that like that, but, I like it. In word, what I'm saying is grow up. Your kingdom subjects, now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others the way God lives toward you. For the next 3 weeks, the series that I'm starting is 'Tis the Season, because I want to challenge us to do some difficult things in a season that's supposed to be about love and hope and family and peace on earth and joy to the world and all those fun Christmassy things. What better time to do something difficult? I want to challenge us today to think about loving our enemies and blessing those that curse us. And I think for me, one of the best examples of what this, the difficulty this presents is in the book of Jonah. So our text for today is going to be the book of Jonah. And if you got your Bibles or you're taking notes, we're going to start out in Jonah chapter 1 and look at verse 1 through 3. So it'll be on the screen. It says in Jonah chapter 1, one day long ago, God's word came to Jonah, Amittai's son. It said, up on your feet and on your way to the big city of Nineveh. Preach to them. They are in a bad way, and I cannot ignore it any longer. But Jonah got up and went the other direction, to Tarshish, running away from God. He went down to the port of Joppa and found a ship headed for Tarshish. He paid it. I know Tarshish sounds weird. I think it's probably Tarshish, but Tarshish sounds like you're saying it wrong every time. Headed for Tarshish. He paid the fare and went on board, joining those going to Tarshish, as far away from God as he can get. Now, Tarshish Tarshish, I don't know, whatever, however you pronounce it. We probably butcher most of the words in the Bible. But anyway, however you pronounce it, it's 2,200 miles the opposite direction. So it's not like he was supposed to go to Marble Falls and chose to go to Lampasas, right? He was supposed to go to Los Angeles and decided went to New York. Like opposite side, 2,200 miles away, right, is an estimate of how far in the opposite direction he's heading. So not only did he say no, he said, heck no. And yes, I said that in church, if that's offensive to you. Most of you are like, no. I've said way worse. Anyway. So he goes, I don't know what that was, but, anyway, deal with it. So he goes the exact opposite direction, 2,200 miles in the opposite direction. Quick question. Have you ever said no to God? Have you ever said no to God? Or maybe maybe your no wasn't no, it was I don't know. That's still no. But it's an I don't. We put I don't in front of it and add a couple of letters and it's I don't know. It's still no. Now, most of you, because it's Jonah, you know where this story is going to go. So I'm going to hit the highlights of the story in case you don't and you're not familiar with it. But I want to point out some things in the story of Jonah. So Jonah's story, if you are unfamiliar with it, kind of the basics are he goes in the opposite direction. He's the prophet of the Lord at the time. So in this particular time, there was one major guy who was the person who heard from the Lord, did what God told him to do, and said what God said to say. And that was it. So Jonah is the guy. He's the anointed prophet of the Lord at this time that's supposed to hear from the Lord and then relate that to the people. And he hears very clearly. There's no confusion. The Lord says to him, I want you to go to Nineveh, and I want you to tell them about me. I want you to preach to them. I want you to save this city because they are messed up and they need somebody. And Jonah says, no. Jonah's not a sinner. He's not a pagan. He's not out in left field. He's the prophet of God. He is a saved, in our terms, he's like the preacher of preachers among Christians. It's not like he was some lost soul. He's already following and listening to the will of God. And so what we learn right off the bat is that if Jonah, the prophet of the Lord, connected to hearing from the word of the Lord, can turn right around and say no, then so can we. Being a saved, born-again Christian does not mean you can't say no to God. In fact, sometimes it means you hear clearly than others and still don't listen. Like there's a higher level of responsibility, right? So Jonah in verse 4, we read that he takes off and he heads the other direction. Not very long that he's on this boat and headed out to sea, a storm happens. And the interesting thing about this storm is this isn't like the enemy sent a storm or, like the devil sent a... No, it literally says in Scripture in verse 4, God sent a storm. God. Everybody say God. Just want to make sure we know who's behind this. God sent a storm, right? And it starts to toss and turn the ship. They think they're going to sink, so they start throwing cargo overboard, and it's not helping, and they're not sure they're going to make it. And then finally, the crew starts to realize, I think someone on board brought this curse upon us. Again, not a Christian crew, right? Like these are just sailors. As far as we know, they are not even Israelites. There's no reason they have any reference for God, and yet in the moment, they're sensing what's going on. We've talked about this, I think, in a previous series, but don't be surprised when somebody who has no business knowing what God is up to knows what God is up to. Sometimes the most accurate voice in your life from God is not somebody who even knows God. Sometimes we block out people in our workplace or whatever who keep saying things, and we're like, shut up, you don't even go to church. And they're being used in that moment to speak God's truth into your life. Abraham is out of pocket. He's in Egypt running from God, and it's the Pharaoh who tells him, go back to where you're supposed to be. Sometimes God will use the person you least expect to give you the will of the Lord for that moment. So the crew of the ship is like, hey, somebody brought this on us. Something's up. And Jonah finally gets to a place where he confesses, all right, it's me. I'm sorry, guys. I brought this on you. I'm apparently the problem here. So they essentially decide we need to throw him over. Actually, I think, depending on your translation, it says Jonah suggests, hey, throw me overboard and you'll be fine. Which is bizarre when you think about it because they're on a boat, it's a storm, and Jonah's like, just toss me in the water and you guys will be fine. And it happens. They toss him in the water and the storm stops. And we never find out what happened to the crew. I assume they made it to Tarshish just perfectly fine, which is bizarre. They tossed a man in the water as a sacrifice, and the storm stopped, which is, if that's not a faith-building moment for the crew, I don't know what is. But we read that Jonah's in the water, and then you guys know the story, right? You grew up in kids' church. A whale or a big fish. So some of you are like sticklers about theology. It doesn't say whale. It says big fish. It doesn't matter. The point is, something picks him up, we can get into the biology of how a fish or a whale could fit Jonah in his mouth and carry him. I don't know. Maybe he was partially digested. That's disgusting. Who knows? But one way or the other, we know Jonah spends some time in the belly of a whale or in the mouth of this fish, or however you want to think about it, or not think about it. Anyway, and it takes him 3 days before he finally starts to pray and say, God, forgive me, essentially. He has a forgiveness moment. God saves him, and the fish spits him out, disgusting, out onto the land, okay? Go with me on this. Spits him out onto the land. And guess what land he happens to spit him out in? Nineveh. Look at that. It's almost like God knew what he was doing. So 3 days he's in this whale, this fish. The fish spits him out, and he happens to be exactly where God wanted him to go. Look at that. Some of you are like, I've heard in church where God won't ever force you to do something that you don't want to do. Talk to Jonah. Now, granted, Jonah had already said yes to God to be the prophet, so that's different. But anyway, we'll talk about that another time. So Jonah's in Nineveh, right? Jonah finally is like, all right, I'll be obedient. Still not happy about it. It specifically mentions Jonah is still not happy about going to the Ninevites, but at this point, he's realizing he doesn't have a choice. So he goes into Nineveh, he preaches, and I think it's roughly 120,000 inhabitants of Nineveh are saved. There's a massive revival in the city. So much so that God's judgment that was about to rain down on the city, God changes his mind and decides not to rain down judgment on Nineveh, which you think is an amazing moment. The guy led a revival service in which 120,000 people roughly are converted to God. Like, it's an amazing moment, and Jonah's still ticked. He's so mad. It's so much so that it says after this, and I think it's in Jonah chapter 4. Yeah, Jonah chapter 4. He goes up to this cliff area where he can look down over the city. And he just sits there and sulks. He's sad. He's mad. And God is basically like, why are you upset? They're saved. Like, they've come to know me. And in this moment, Jonah is so mad that these people are saved because in his mind, they deserve to be destroyed. The prophet of God is like, these people should die. And God has this conversation with Jonah, where he's like, did you create them? Are you responsible for them? No. You are only responsible to do what I told you to do. And I love them and care about them. Why wouldn't I want to reclaim them? Right? This story of Jonah, what drives a person to be so against this moment, it has to be hate. Hate in this moment. The Ninevites were enemies to Jonah and to Jonah's people. If you know anything about the Ninevites throughout history, Nineveh was one of the most hated people groups up until this point for several different reasons. They were considered one of the most vile and violent military units of all time up to that point. Their treatment, especially of prisoners of war, was notorious for being awful. They would, not only would they win a war, but they would torture and dismember, and it was just disgusting. They were hated. It was one of these people. They were known for how evil, how disrespectful they were. Countries hated Nineveh. And so Jonah has grown up, his life watching these people group be terrible, be awful, be the worst of humanity. And that's the people God sends Jonah to. And so Jonah feels justified in this hate. Like, these are awful people, God. Why do they deserve freedom? Why do they deserve salvation? They deserve to be destroyed. Jonah would rather see the destroyed and the people lost. And see, the tricky thing is that hate can do things to you. Maybe we don't call it hate because a lot of us, we grew up in church and you're not supposed to hate people. So it's like, I really dislike. Call it what it is. It's hate. Hate does things to us. Hate can make you think things that would never occur to you otherwise. Hate can make you say things that are completely foreign to how you normally say and think. It can lead you to do things that you didn't think you were capable of, and it can leave you lost and lonely and unable to find your way to shore. See, God went to extremes to remove the hate from Jonah. Think about some of the things God does in just this story alone, in 4 chapters of the Bible, that are supernatural. God sends a storm out of nowhere. The moment Jonah gets on a boat and takes off in the wrong direction, God sends a storm that ceases the moment Jonah gets off the boat, which is crazy in and of itself. Then he provides a fish, a giant fish, a whale, I don't know, to transport a man from one place to another. Crazy. Doesn't happen any other time. And then God causes the fish to vomit Jonah onto the shore, which just that in of itself, if I'm sitting there fishing, and just watching the water, and some fish or whale just kind of pops out of the water and pukes a human onto shore, what just happened? Like, when you picture the reality of this story, it's the most bizarre set of circumstances. But what it shows is that God is willing to pull out all the stops to first of all, get done what he wants to get done, but to overcome Jonah's hate for these people. He's not letting that stop him. He's trying to force it out of him. And Jonah is still hanging on to the hate through this entire story. And then at the end of the story, he directs the hate towards God. He's mad at God because God did something amazing in the people of Nineveh. And he's like, how dare you save them and use me to do it? Right? Jonah is so full of hate that at the end of the book of Jonah, he'd rather die than let go. And he hates the Ninevites. And now that God has saved them, he doesn't want any part of it. And sadly, the story of Jonah, the book of Jonah, ends with us not really knowing if Jonah ever turns away from his hate. It doesn't say in Jonah, found love in his heart for the Ninevites or understood that God knew better. And it doesn't. It ends with the idea that Jonah has a decision to make. And I think that's interesting because it's almost as if that book of the Bible is telling us we too will deal with enemies. We'll deal with hate. We'll deal with difficulty. And it's up to us to decide what we do with it. God never gives up on Jonah, and he doesn't give up on us. Jonah, then, in the story, he makes a shelter, and God has this whole back and forth with Jonah where he's trying to get Jonah to see it. And like I said, the story ends where we don't know if Jonah ever lets go of his hate. And it's kind of like he puts the ball in our court and says, all right, what are you going to do? The book of Jonah is almost written like a moral of the story kind of story, where it ends and it's like, so the moral of the story is, what will you do with your hate? Will you allow it to control you and taint everything else in your life? Jonah is the prophet of God, and yet we don't hear anything else from Jonah after this point. The revival of the city of Nineveh is the last moment in the story of Jonah. Who knows what could have been done in the rest of Jonah's life? The story ends with him being unwilling to face his hate. So then the personalization, what we take from this is you have to ask yourself, do you have any hate? Maybe we won't label it hate. Maybe it's unforgiveness. Maybe it's bitterness. Maybe it's hostility. Maybe we get irritated with the same person over it. It's frustration. And we would sometimes, we're good as humans and as Christians sometimes of just burying it. It's not a big deal. It's not a problem. It's fine. They kind of annoy me, but it's just a personality thing. Except that it's maybe that one person over and over and over again. And sometimes you get to the point where you haven't dealt with it so much that the tiniest of things can just ignite this explosive response from you. Maybe it's a friend or a former friend that betrayed you and was disloyal and created this moment of disgust in your life. And maybe it's created ripples into the relationships with everyone. That it's hard for you to have friendships or close, trusting relationships with other people because of that one situation. Maybe it's a parent that abandoned you. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, I don't know. But they neglected, they left, and that moment has been the filter through which everything else in life, your concept of God even, is poisoned by that relationship, by the hate of that moment. Maybe it's a boss or a coworker or somebody that you worked with professionally that shouldn't have even been that big a deal. It's like, it's just a job. It's not that big a deal. And yet it is the absolute most destructive thought that continues to pervade, to roll around in your head. It's toxic. It's difficult. It's whatever. Maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe it's a religious group. Maybe you were hurt by the church. Not this church, hopefully, but maybe it was a different kind of church. A group of people who should have been better, who should have known better, who should have better represented Christ. And yet, the way they said one thing and did another caused you to forever distrust God because you distrust his people. I say all the time, a lot of people I meet and talk with over the years that have had problems with God, it's not actually with God, it's with God's people. They misrepresented him. They misinformed. They misdisplayed the character of God, and it's caused people to walk away from the church. Maybe it's a race. I mean, I'd like to think that maybe no one in here deals with that, but let's be honest. Sometimes we do. I think we live in a world where that still exists. Maybe. Maybe it's a political group. I know this is church, and politics is a difficult subject, and we can get overly fixated on it. But if you find yourself immediately taking an opposing stance to someone because of a political affiliation or a cultural affiliation or a religious affiliation, maybe you got an issue there. Right? If somebody introduced themselves to you and said, hey, what's up? I'm a Republican, or I'm a conservative, or I'm a liberal, or I'm a Democrat, and the reaction in your heart and in your mind is, ugh. Could it just be surface? Maybe. But if it evokes a visceral dislike, you might have a problem. Just saying. Maybe? So here's where I want to go with this. Hate doesn't stop until it consumes all of you. That's just the nature of hate. So how do we deal with that? I think there's a couple of practical things, and I'll run through them real quick, and then we're going to put this into practice a little bit today. Number one, I think you have to just ask for forgiveness. Ever in doubt of where to start on how to deal with a given situation, step one, just ask God to forgive you. That's it. There's times where I've got so much going on in my heart and in my life, and I'm like, God, I don't know what to do. Let me just start with saying, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I've been unwilling to deal with this. I'm sorry that I've ran from it. I'm sorry that I've been stubborn and difficult. God, I'm just going to start with forgiveness. Number one, ask for forgiveness. That's it. That's it. Number one, ask for forgiveness. It sounds like such a simple step, but there is this cleansing that takes place. There's this tilling of the soil of our heart. That ground, no matter what part of our heart, has become so hardened and difficult that nothing can get through, nothing can pierce in. Just starting with the humility that's required to say, God, I'm sorry, forgive me, can till that difficult soil up. So maybe first step for you is to say, God, I'm sorry that I've been unwilling to let go of my hate or to let go of my anger or my bitterness or my disagreement with that person or that situation. Secondly, every day, say every day. Just as a reminder, every day, ask God's love to fill your heart. If your workplace is tough for you, then man, start every day by saying, God, please fill my heart with love. For these people, for this job, it makes a difference. Sometimes the reason why we see so much inconsistency in our relationships with people is because we are inconsistent in our relationship with God. When you start to breed consistency every day saying, God, enter my life, fill me with your love, be a part of my life, guess what? You start to see consistency in every area of your life. Number three, stay clear of hate sources. You can feed your hate. It's like a monster inside of you. And the more you put yourself in a situation that you feed into it, the stronger and louder it gets. Right? If all you read are things that reinforce negative opinions and perspectives you have, if all you're watching is things that just reinforce your hate and get you stirred up and get you riled up, and you wonder why your difficulty, your anger, your bitterness, your discontentment is at an all-time high. Maybe you can't stand the place you work, but all you do on your break time is sit in the break room complaining with other coworkers about the job you have. And you wonder why it just doesn't go away. Well, because you sit in a room full of people just stewing on the hate that you all have. Stirring it up, right? Maybe you have a difficulty with a political group, but all you watch are things that just complain about the opposition, how they're terrible, how they're awful, and you just stir it up inside you, right? Maybe you have a difficulty with a family member, but you get together with other family members and you talk about how you don't like this family member and they're a problem, and all you're doing is feeding that hate monster in your life. And you wonder why it's this giant, insurmountable, difficult anger monster, and it's because you keep feeding it. Sometimes just removing yourself from a situation, from a conversation, from a group of people that constantly feed that bitterness in your life is the first step to freeing yourself from it. Number 4, be around people who love more. If you ever met somebody who's just a loving person, who's a forgiving person, who's a fun person, a joyful person, who seems to reflect more of the character of God than you do, stick around that person. Go, man, I don't know, don't take this in a weird way, but I like the vibe you have going with God. I just want to talk to you more, right? Maybe that's weird, but it's weird how when you get around people with negative attitudes, you start to be more negative. And when you get around people with positive attitudes, you start to be more positive, even if it annoys you at first. Like, let's be honest. Sometimes we get around people that are so just like positive and joy-filled, we're like almost annoyed at first. That's because it grates against the negativity of your life. But you know what? Enough grating and things start to smooth out, right? Enough friction against your heart and your mind and your attitude, and it starts to rub off on you a little bit. Maybe sometimes you need better friends, right? Think about the story of Job. He's in this miserable place, and he goes to his friends, and they just feed that misery. And finally, he's like, I have to get rid of you people because you're a problem. You're a problem, right? That's how it goes. Number 5, practice loving those you hate. And that's what I want us to kind of finish with. Matt, Sarah, those little boxes right there, would one of you hand out pens and one of you hand out cards? I'm going to give you a piece of paper and a pen. And consider this a homework assignment. I'm sorry, I know. Some of you are out of school and you don't want to ever have anything to do with it. Some of you are still in school like Matt and Sarah, and you're done. Matt graduates in 2 weeks, y'all. He's finishing up his bachelor's. Sarah is in med school, and it might be driving her crazy. Like, it's just, it's a lot. So that when I talk about homework, I'm sure Sarah's like, no more homework. Please don't do this to me. But I promise this will be very simple, and yet maybe the most difficult thing you've done in a while. Because what I want you to do with this piece of paper and this pen is I want you to think about, in this moment, maybe pray. That'd be a good place to start. I'm going to pray before we write anything. But I want you to think about Matthew chapter 5. What did it say at the top? It said, verse 44, I say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. So what I want you to think about is, who is my enemy? Who's your enemy? And now that might be a name. You might work with a person. I get it. Like, even though we live in the like Marvel Avengers time of, pop culture, most of us don't have an arch enemy, right? We don't have this arch villain that is the bane of our existence, right? So maybe you don't have some super villain who is the antithesis of all that you are. So maybe I get it. You're not going to write like the Joker. That's probably not how that works out for you. But maybe there's a coworker who is just destroying your sanity right now. Maybe it's a family member who has been actively, maybe even, rooting against you, working against you. Maybe it's an individual, a name you're writing down. Maybe it's a people group, an interest group, a political group, whatever, that you feel like maybe it's even justified. Maybe you actively have somebody in your life who hates you and is working against you. I hope that that's not the case, but maybe you do. Maybe it's not even something that, maybe it's just something you're unwilling to let go of. But I want you to think about, in this season of life, what is it that riles you up? What is it that you feel like is working against you? What is it that you feel like when that subject or that thing or that person comes up, it's like the I don't know, like this something just rises up within you and you're just like, ugh, I hate that. Hate that guy. I can't stand this. Like, it's just that thing that drives you insane, that no matter how calm or peaceful or pleasant your life is, when that person speaks or that topic comes up or that experience gets, or triggered or whatever, you just lose it. And you can feel the sanity of your mind starting to slip. What is that thing that you're unwilling to let go of? And I want you to write it down. Take a second and write it out, because then we're going to do something with it. There's more pens up here if you didn't get one. Allie went to the bathroom at the wrong moment. You're fine. Write it down, and you don't have to show it to anybody. That's fine. Maybe it's your, hopefully it's not your spouse or the person next to you, but just in case, you can write it down secretly, I guess. It's probably not anybody in here. It should be all right. I don't know. Write it down. And here's the hard part. This week, you're going to pray for that person, that group, that situation, and you're going to find a way to bless them. I know that stinks. I know that stinks. Listen, some of you, listen, I know for some of you it might be a little more abstract. For some of you it might be very real and very sensitive and very hurtful. I know how difficult this can be for some. Some of us, we're not in a very, maybe you're not in a very hateful place and you're like, okay, I can do that. It's no big deal. Some of us, this might be a very, very difficult thing. And yet, it might be the most freeing thing you've ever done. To take a second at some point this week and find a way to bless that person, that situation, that thing, that people group, whatever it may be. I know that's hard. But I also know it might be the biggest victory you've ever had. Because that bitterness, that hate, that difficulty, that anger might be the thing that's kept you repressed from moving forward in Christ your entire life. You might have always felt like you were running at half speed with God, like you just never could quite catch the right rhythm. You never could quite get over something. It was like you were always slightly weighed down. That's what hate will do to you. It's baggage you don't even sometimes know you have. And you wonder why, man, I feel like I've always been running half speed. I feel like I've never quite hit my stride with God. Like we're always good, but it's like it always gets tripped up in some way. Maybe that one thing that keeps tripping you up in this season, God is saying it's your unwillingness to let go. To be honest, to trust me with it. In this holiday season of joy and love and presence, and we're going to start with loving our enemies. I mean, and if you need a better reason than because Jesus says to, I can give you some, but it's in black and white. There's no theology degree needed to interpret what he says here. He says, love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Now, I'm not saying you just flip a switch and love your enemies. That might be hard to just, oh yeah, sure, I'll love them now. I don't think he's that naive either. Loving your enemies is an intentional choice that starts with choosing to try. Does not mean you'll be successful. It means you jump out of the boat, you might take a step or two, and you might falter. But in that faltering, he's there to pick us back up and move forward. And how crazy would it be if the kind of love that we displayed as Christians here in this church is not the part where he says anybody can love the lovable. Anybody can do that. You don't have to be a Christian to love people that you love. That doesn't require Christ. Matter of fact, Christ actually says at one point, they'll know this, that you are my disciples. How? By how you love one another, right? Jesus says that. It's his words. They will know you are my disciples by how you love one another. It's not Christianly. It doesn't require the power of Christ to love lovable people. That's easy. It requires the power of Christ in our life to love those who don't deserve it, who actively work against it. That's what's remarkable. And that's what we're going to pursue. So God, in this moment, pray with me. God, in this moment, we ask for the strength to do this. We know, God, for some of us, this is a lifetime's worth of hate and bitterness and frustration and difficulty. We've built this opposition campaign in our hearts and in our minds against this particular person or people group or situation or whatever. Maybe it's even built into our identity. It's a characteristic people know about us. And it's become so ingrained in us that it keeps us from even responding to what you're saying. Like Jonah, we don't even want to do what you ask us to do because of our hate for this person or this group or this situation. But God, if we say that we follow you and we listen to you and we love you, then we have to obey your commandments. We have to do what you say. And you say very clearly and in no uncertain terms, love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Bless those who would work actively against you. And so God, this week, I pray that you give us the strength to do that. As much as it will be kind of annoying, God, I pray that you give us ample opportunities to do that. That might mean that we see more of this person that we hate than we've seen in the last 6 months this week. God, when we're faced with the opportunity to be annoyed or angered or that bitterness is irritated to its fullest extent, we pray that in that moment your Holy Spirit would remind us this is on purpose to give us the opportunity to practice what we said we'd do. Rather than respond with hate and with vitriol, God, we respond in love for those who are enemies, and we bless those who would curse us. Thank you, Lord. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Is that hard? I mean, I feel like it is for some of us, right? Do you hate me a little? Hopefully not. Like, I just, yeah, hate the things on your card, maybe. But look, I realistically, I know, look, as humans, and let's face it, sometimes as Christians, we're really good at having a moment and then leaving and then putting that card in your Bible or in your car or on a desk and never thinking about it. Until next Sunday, whenever I say something like, how'd your homework go? And you're like, oh, I didn't do that. Right? Like some of our men at Bible study tonight. Oh, I forgot to do that. Nah, I'm just joking, kind of. I know it's hard. So take the card, put it somewhere you'll remember it. That's why I had you write it down. I could have just told you to think about something. Take the card, put it somewhere you'll remember it. If it's in your car on the little dash there, that's fine. If it's on your bathroom mirror, I don't know. If it's on your bedside table, I don't know, somewhere where you'll remember it. And it's okay that maybe right now thinking about it, you don't even want to. Like maybe right now you're like, I don't know if I can. Okay. Just step one, put the card somewhere that you'll see it. Maybe that's all you accomplish today. Put the card somewhere you'll see it. Monday rolls around, tomorrow, and you're like, nah, I ain't doing that. Maybe not. But leave it where you can see it. Be open to the idea that God will give you. Don't be shocked when tomorrow morning the person that you can't stand at work is the first person you see and they come right up to your desk. Like, don't be surprised about that. I just prayed that God would do that. So again, you can hate me later. It's fine. Put me on your card. I'm kidding. But thanks for. But really try. If you go to this church, it should be because you're willing to face hard things. This is a hard thing. But it's when you face those things that you can see the biggest breakthroughs in your life. Okay? I love you. 'Tis the season. All right? Have a great week. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.